Danny Brown has always been an artist who likes paying homage to the past while kind of maintaining that own distinct persona of his. I think The Guardian actually summed him up well quite recently. He's nearing 40 years old, he's pathologically indiscreet and drug guzzling, but in 2019 he's grown up and matured. It's not to say that the former is a bad thing, it's what led him to have a trilogy of records that rank among the decade's most critically acclaimed releases. I think creative spirit is something that lives in him. And if you think about it, an approach he used to take was that catch the lightning in a bottle approach. He'd do a verse in one take and try to capture it as fast as possible. Now, working with Q-Tip on his latest album changed that. And with that, it brought a shift to Brown's chaotic style. You know what I'm saying? As an album is an attempt to break free from his persona as a drug rapper, while at the same time channeling his inner desire to sort of lead by example. He talks about how he used to learn more from rappers than he did his own dad. However, nowadays he notes that kids listen to kids and only listen to them because they're relatable at a superficial level, not on a philosophical level. He appreciates that saturation in the hip-hop industry exists because it also makes those who are great stand out even more. He also appreciates the fact that the stigma of being old in the music industry is actually in the past. And I personally think it's phenomenal that he's nearing 40 and is still an amazing musical artist who's capable of going toe to toe with some of the best. Now, Danny has been notorious for being an introvert recorder, being solely at home for months at a time grinding out his projects. Every night playing beats and looking for as challenging beats as possible. That aspect of waiting for inspiration to strike is interesting, although it probably has a short lifespan if used continuously, as he found out the hard way. Even on his interview with Hot 97, he said, "You Know What I'm Saying" was basically Q-Tip's album. Taking Danny's own hip-hop identity back to grassroots and just rapping was Q-Tip's focus, focusing on rhyming as opposed to generating odder and weirder concepts. Now I'm actually going to talk about how a lot of things that you may not know about have actually influenced Danny himself. British culture is one of them, and I think it's pretty silly because I know for a fact we're not interesting people. Joking aside, he's a fan of the BBC mockumentary People Just Do Nothing, a show that was relatively funny, self-aware and dark. The point where MC Grinder realizes he's 30 and the music industry is moving on without him is something that actually made Danny cry because it was relatable to him at one point. It's a great point on how relatability is something that is infinitely more powerful than a lot of the other details that we as humans and entertainers in general tend to focus on. The show was also something that got him into garage. Now I'll probably definitely cover garage in another video. He gravitated towards garage as a genre because its focus was not generally on being super lyrical, and it still had a sense of positivity. Danny Brown's a competitive man and he hates people being better than him in some capacity. So music in a sense for him is a wake-up call to do better. The community that supports him is also a vice that keeps making him push his own boundaries for better or worse. Now that's interesting, because having that sort of feedback loop is helpful up to a point, but it can also be destructive depending on your own interpretation of what that means. If I give an example, for example, if I look at you guys, my viewers, I think, wow, there's so much love, even in critique. For example, the way I mispronounced Tebe as Thebe in Earl's earlier video was a stark reminder of that, and not everyone likes critique. But it's something that I now cherish because attention is interest regardless of tone, and it's always an opportunity to improve. Joey Diaz is someone Danny has actively listened to ever since Joey himself appeared on the one and only Joe Rogan's podcast. The open heart and love that Diaz has had for him over the years after meeting him is something that Danny cherishes. In particular, and going back to the relatability point, Diaz is someone who's both older and has had a longer history with addiction. The situation is sort of Danny finding a role model who matches his own past, and I think that sort of expands on the idea of a role model. Role models don't always have to be generic and inspiring to many. What you as an individual seek as an inspiration can often work just as well as long as you look in the right places. I actually just finished watching Dolomite Is My Name, the film with Eddie Murphy starring as Rudy Ray Moore, who made Dolomite, a Blaxploitation film, aka black action films in the 70s and 80s, intended for black audiences. Danny finds the comedy from poor production entertaining, as audiences did back in the day. That kind of it's so bad it's good. It raises the question, how subjective is comedy, and should there be a quality scale based on production value, or is joy what you make of it? I think the joy from blaxploitation films, for me personally, comes from the unpredictability, that component of randomness and having a free spirit. The same sort that I think Tyler the Creator sort of channels on, a lot of his albums and appearances. Overall, the root of Danny Brown's sorrow has come from drugs, from his uncle smoking crack in the kitchen to Danny then selling them himself. He's done well to overcome adversity in a decade-long struggle to build his own musical career. So adversity and a desire to improve has always been instilled in him. He observes how the hip-hop landscape has generally changed and is nowadays personality-driven. Think about that, how hip-hop has gone to being personality-driven. He noted how a YouTuber with a large following could make a gold record easily, something Danny, a music purist, doesn't have. Now, is that a bad thing? Isn't music just a form of entertainment, and is it wrong for it to also evolve with the surrounding media landscape? This is an interesting rhetoric, nonetheless. I think to finish off this video, a mention of Danny's House is in order, his sketch comedy show on Viceland. A$AP Rocky, Schoolboy Q, ELP, and other people will be guests, with more to come. It builds off Danny's desire to do more comedy and to have conversations that he feels is missing from the entertainment industry. The representation of the basement as the backdrop is important because as kids in Detroit, that was the place to be playing basketball and chilling, and while growing up it becomes your room. The show is generally free form and it's just his expression of being funny. It's interesting how Danny's approach to comedy has been so unique and true to himself, while also maintaining subject matters that are separate from the music, and that's key, the fact that he's managed to make his comedy separate from the music. It's its own entity. So to wrap up, I think, as the nation stated, he is the patron saint of rap misfits, but it also is a changing man. He's managed to reinvent himself after a decade in the industry and has done so by being open, honest, and not afraid to change and listen. I'm actually surprised at how aware he is, and he still has that desire to learn about things and life. I'm pretty sure that his random erratic attitude and his restlessness in life has led him to these opportunities and to learn. And so, to me, Danny is an example of how being unconventional is also a definite possible path to success. You just need to be dedicated.